Welcome to Simsbury Land Trust presentation, Alien Invaders, the plants that threaten our wild habitats. My name is Margery Winters and I serve on the Land Trust board. Combating invasive plants is one of the biggest challenges we face as we strive to keep our preserves ecologically healthy. Many of the plants that are invading our wild areas are coming from our own yards. We need your help in tackling this problem. Many of us take great care and pride in our yards and our beautiful plants, but let's take a closer look at those plants. So let's take a look and see what's in our yard. If you look at the plants that are in your yard, you'll see this, a lot of them have something in common. They are not from around here. And why is that? Well, people went around the world to find these plants. The age of exploration also meant the age of moving plants around. There were actually people called plant hunters who led lives of daring do to find these plants. They would go to all sorts of countries to find just the right plant to bring back to us. Most of those plants come from an area that has a very similar climate to ours. So you can see our area in eastern North America is very similar to the climate in Europe and similar to the climate in China. And that's where a lot of our plants come from. About 1/3 of the thousands of different plant species that have been introduced into the Northeast were introduced from other country or regions of the United States. Most of them are very well behaved. You're not going to see peonies escaping into our woodlands. But others are not as well behaved, as this kudzu is in the southern part of the United States. So what makes an invasive plant invasive? Well, there are a variety of things. First, they usually make abundant seeds. They spread easily by seed or by their root system. They leaf out early in the spring, earlier than our native plants, and they keep their leaves quite often longer than our native plants. And they have few pests or disease. We'll come back to that. They also may produce chemicals that stunt the nearby plants, and they can grow in a wide variety of soils, moisture, and climate light regimes. And they're often difficult to kill. These are very adaptable plants. Some of them came in by gardeners. We plant them in our yards. Some of them were introduced by our conservation agencies. And 10% were introduced accidentally. They came in on the ballast of ship and in seed mixes. So is this a problem? Here we have purple loosestrife in a wetland. Is this a serious problem? It looks gorgeous. But actually, yes. Our non-native plants, the invasive non-native plants, are actually the major cause for habitat loss. 3 million acres are lost per year due to alien plants. Half of the species on the federal endangered species list are due to invasive species, either plant or insects, or other diseases. And removal is expensive and time-consuming. I work at Roaring Brook Nature Center and I serve on the Simsbury Land Trust board, and I know there are certain plants that have come into our properties. One of the jobs I have at the Nature Center is to have community service people remove some of these plants from our adjacent woodlands. And by community service, I usually mean court-appointed community service people. And I know that these people, once they've spent hours removing these plants from our woods, they will not be planting them in their own yards. So what really makes an invasive plant most problematic is that item that they have few pests. These plants left their pests, their insects, and the animals that keep them under control in their own country, they left them behind, or at least we hope they did. So when they come here, they have free reign. They love it here. Nobody eats them. And by nobody eats them, I mean the insects. There are no insects that are eating them. Insects are a great way to keep plants in check. And E.O. Wilson, a entomologist, a world-famous entomologist, said the insects are the little things that run the world. Insects can live without humans, but humans cannot live without insects. They are vital to our ecosystems. So here's how our native plants support insects. You can see that many of our native plants support a wide variety of insects. Most of these are actually caterpillars. And then compare this to our non-native species, things like forsythia. Forsythia supports one insect species. This spring, go to your forsythia bush and see how many bees are coming. See how many insects are eating its leaves. So one species of insects. And why is that important? Well, those caterpillars that eat the leaves of the forsythia, or don't, are what the birds are looking for. This spring, birds are coming to make their nests in your yard. They're looking at the plants that you have in your yard, and they're looking for the caterpillars that are going to eat your plants. And caterpillars are food for baby birds. Here you have a mother chickadee. She's bringing back a caterpillar to her young, and she is going to put that caterpillar in the mouth of the biggest chick. He's going to go to sleep. Dad's going to come by a few minutes later, put a caterpillar in the next biggest mouth, and they'll work their way down. Hopefully, they will get a caterpillar in the mouth of the little one before the largest chick wakes up. Because if the largest one wakes up, he's going to get the caterpillar. So you need a tremendous number of caterpillars to raise a nest of baby birds. And as you can see in the figure, it takes 6,000 to 10,000 caterpillars to raise one nest of baby chickadees. And that's only to get them out of the nest. Feeding continues for another few weeks after that, so even more insects are needed. So who counted all these insects? Well, there's a lovely man, Douglas Tallamay. He's an entomologist with the University of Delaware. He had grad students that went out and counted those caterpillars. And what he found was that the native plants support a lot more insects, a lot more caterpillars than our non-native plants. And he wrote a couple of books, Bringing Nature Home and Nature's Best Hope. I encourage you to read them. However, if you don't have time for that, he has wonderful videos. Spend an hour with Douglas Tallamay and you will change how you garden. What he and his grad students found, is that where we have native vegetation, we have more bird species and more birds in total. And when we plant non-native plants in our yard, we have fewer birds. Why? Because there's no food for those baby birds. The adult birds can eat the berries, but the baby birds, 97% of our songbirds, have to have caterpillars in their early phase of their life. And why is this disturbing? Our insect populations are decreasing. The Lepidoptera, or the butterflies and moths, and all the other invertebrates are decreasing substantially over the last few decades. This is because we're not feeding them the right plants. We're filling our landscape with non-native plants that do not support our native insects. Our native insects are the best way of converting leaves into protein for higher up in the food chain. So let's meet some of these aliens that are coming into our landscape. We already met this one before. This is purple loosestrife. It is a beautiful plant that has escaped from our gardens. Here it is. You can see it just nicely hiding away in the back of this perennial border. Purple loosestrife is one of those plants that makes lots and lots and lots of seeds, and all of them are viable. They will germinate wherever they land. And if they land in a wetland, their preferred habitat, they will take over. Again, because they don't have any insects to eat them. So this looks pretty. It's hard to believe this is a problem. It's certainly not a problem for the butterflies and the nectar-feeding insects. They love these plants. However, you have to remember the life cycle of the butterfly. They start off as caterpillars, and caterpillars are very picky eaters for the most part. And how does a mother mother butterfly know where to lay her eggs? She has taste buds on her feet. She will land on those plants, and she tastes that plant. She knows exactly which plant her caterpillars are going to eat. So while there are flowers for the butterflies, there are no leaves for the caterpillars. So let's go to our next invader. This is one that you probably all recognize, the beautiful berries of the Oriental bittersweet. And again, you can see these plants are all coming from other parts of the world. This is that strangling vine that you see throughout on all our trees in Simsbury. They wrap around the tree, and it's like a giant boa constrictor of a plant. It will weigh down the tree. Eventually the trees will come crashing down, and it will also girdle the bark of the tree, and the plant will die. The tree will die. So how does this spread? Well, the birds love those berries. Those berries are toxic to us, but they're very tasty to the birds. And then another way is they're a very attractive plant in the fall. People go out, collect the vines, make them into a lovely wreath. They hang it on the door until the other holidays come around, and then they pitch the wreath into the backyard and then wonder why their backyard is suddenly being taken over by these vines. Another very popular plant in our landscape, and one that you can find in a lot of nurseries still, is burning bush. It is an easy plant to grow, tough as nails. Again, it left its insect friends back home in the old country. And the only redeeming feature to this plant is that it turns a beautiful red in the fall for a couple of weeks. Unfortunately, it also makes lots of berries, which the birds will eat. The berries will pass through the bird's digestive tract as it flies away, and they'll be deposited in a nice little fertilized package somewhere in our woodlands. This plant will grow, again, because it has no competition, and you can identify it by the corky bark. You might recognize this on plants, and it's also got opposite leaves. What you don't see is its root system. It's a very, very dense and fibrous root system that doesn't allow any other plant to grow underneath it. So here you can see the birds having a wonderful feast. So just because a plant feeds the birds doesn't mean it's a good thing for our environment. As a matter of fact, when I moved to Simsbury, I looked to Audubon to see what plants I should be planting in my yard to feed the birds, and this was one of the plants that was recommended because of its abundant crop of berries. But again, without those caterpillars to feed the baby birds, doesn't matter how many adults you feed, you won't have any birds if you don't have caterpillars. This plant is taking over in our woodlands. Here you can see a nice stand of burning bush, and that's all you see is a nice stand of burning bush. Often in our woodlands it comes out sort of a pink color. You can see a nice stand of this near Onion Mountain. Another very popular one is autumn olive. This one was actually sent home with school children in Simsbury decades ago to plant in yards because it is such a producer of berries. You can identify it by its silver leaves on the underside, and here you can see, and the lovely flowers that will be in bloom in about a month and a half. And you walk anywhere in Simsbury, take a walk around Simsbury Farm, and you can smell the fragrant flowers of the autumn olive. After they're pollinated, they will produce an abundant crop of berries that the birds will eat and distribute throughout the land. Autumn olive is an interesting one in that the roots change the soil chemistry and they disrupt the native plants in the community. And once it's established, it can outcompete all of the other plants. Another one that you will be familiar with is the multiflora rose. If you walk in Simsbury in May, you will smell roses, and it's coming from this plant. This is from eastern China and Japan and Korea. It is noted by having a lot of abundant white flowers. Originally, this plant was brought into Simsbury, plant along highways as a living guardrail. Anyone familiar with this plant knows of its wonderful thick arching canes. This plant was also planted along stream corridors to keep the cows out of the streams. The abundant flowers are pollinated and make abundant berries, again for the birds to spread. This plant also has wicked thorns. This is a tough one to eradicate because it hurts. The thorns catch on clothing, they scratch skin. You have to wear protective gear when you're cutting this down. But the long canes will cover buildings, will cover trees, and is a problem in our wild areas. This one's a tricky one. This is Japanese knotweed. This was brought over as a garden plant. It's beautiful. It looks a bit like bamboo. It has these wonderful heart-shaped leaves and a speckled stem that is hollow. But what's really intriguing about it is its root system. The root system goes down and it stores a tremendous amount of energy in its roots, and any little fragment of root from that plant will grow. So even if you get out most of the plant, anything left behind will regrow and take over. This plant will grow up through concrete. It also produces all those flowers, and all those lovely white flowers will produce abundant seeds. These seeds have little wings on them, so they're distributed by birds. They can be distributed by wind. They can be distributed by water. So wonderfully distributed throughout our system. And here you can see a stream bank that has been completely taken over by this plant. And another, Norway maple. This one's from Europe and Southwest Asia. It is planted as a landscape tree because it is so hardy. Again, because it's left its insect foes at home. It differs from our native sugar maple. Its leaf is broader. It has more points. If you were to break off a leaf, you would see a latex sap. Its seeds look different than the sugar maple seeds. They're much more broad. And this plant will flower out in yellow or chartreuse flowers in the early spring. What's truly interesting about this plant is that it keeps its leaves longer in the fall and it leaves out earlier in the spring. This affects the bloom time of a lot of our native plants. A lot of our spring wildflowers bloom at the time when our native plants, our native trees, do not have leaves. That's when they're able to photosynthesize and set flowers and make seeds. Under the dense shade of the Norway maple, we do not have spring wildflowers. It's interesting the different ways that these non-native plants do affect our wildlife. This is one of the non-native honeysuckles. You can often see them by the beautiful little berries that they produce after flowering. The birds love them, and the birds will eat them. Interesting thing, birds get their coloration for some of their feathers, their pigments, from the things that they eat. Just as if you ate too many carrots or squash, you'd get on a lovely orange glow. Same thing with the birds. And the scientists have found that in areas where the birds have an abundance of these non-native honeysuckles, it affects the pigment. So here we have a cedar waxwing, the tip of whose tail should be yellow, but in an area where there are too many of these non-native plants, their tail turns orange. Now this doesn't seem like a big thing, except for the fact that if you were a female cedar waxwing and you saw the orange tip of the feathers of this bird, you'd say there's something wrong with him and he's going to miss out on the breeding season. One of the more problematic plants in our area is Japanese barberry, another invader. This bush, which is used in many of our landscapes, has thorns. This makes it not much fun to remove. A lot of times people say, but this plant is not escaping from my yard. I have a maroon barberry. I've never seen a maroon barberry in the woodlands. Well, you wouldn't. When the birds come and eat its abundant berries and carry them into the woodlands, they breed back to their true form as green plants. And you can see these arching branches of the Japanese barberry in our woods. There's a health impact to this plant. In areas where Japanese barberry have taken over the landscape, as in some of our areas at the Land Trust, there is an abundance of deer tick. And that's because the white-footed mouse or the deer mouse likes to hide under the barberry. They're safe from predators there. They eat the berries, and with the mice come the ticks. In areas where there is abundant Japanese barberry, there's also a higher risk of Lyme disease. Our wild areas are becoming infested with these plants. We need your help. We're asking you to remove these plants from your yard. No matter how beautiful, they are wreaking havoc in our local wild areas. We need your help. Cut them down, pull them out, and in some cases, we'll even need to use chemicals to remove them. But we need to work together so that we can stop this invasion. Thank you for watching. And if you would like to learn more about how you can remove these invasives from your yard, or if you would like to help us remove them from our preserves, please contact us. We welcome your help. Again, let's pull together to tackle this growing problem.
Funding for Simsbury Community Television is provided in part by contributions from viewers like you. Thank you.